So thank you so much for coming here and doing this with me today.
Of
Um,
course.
I just wanted to first off start by saying, in honor of Women's History Month, is there anything specific you teach your students every year? And if so, what is the importance of and intention behind what you're teaching?
Sure. Are you saying something independent, or how do I work these topics into my class?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you work these topics into your class?
Sure, sure. Well, as we all try to do in the social studies department, we try to tell history from all voices, and women's history is definitely not an exception. US one is tough, right? Because it really did take women a while to really get that momentum of really beginning a movement. You're really not going to see a movement for women's rights until the antebellum period. But that said, that certainly does not mean that there is not plenty to talk about. We always try to focus on not necessarily just the Abigail Adamses, although we obviously focus on Abigail, and it's not all about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but it's also about just the way that women have contributed to American history since the very founding. So we start off with the indigenous tribes, and we talk about the different divisions of labor and gender divisions and the different ways that the tribes dealt with those issues. And when we talk about this original settlement of the colonies, there were many of these colonial settlements that chose not even to bring women over. And then once they realized that they were looking for permanent settlements, that's when you started having women, a lot of times poor women, who were rounded up and kind of sent over to the colonies as wives, essentially. So we spent a whole unit on that. So I mean, I could go on. I didn't know how much detail you wanted me to go into.
That's more than enough.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so just going into again, like the importance of Women's History Month, do you believe that it's, has it gained or lost its recognition over the past couple of years?
Quite the contrary. I think that there is more awareness than ever of history being taught from the perspective of different voices. There's actually even been a little bit of a backlash against history teachers from some groups saying that we are teaching the negative side of history and we're teaching students to hate America. I heard a congressman say that in early January, actually. So unfortunately, there is backlash sometimes, but I would argue then, I think that just demonstrates that these are issues that are getting a lot more recognition in classrooms, not for the purpose of getting students to hate America, but quite the opposite, to be aware of our country's history and the struggles that women, not just in American history, but throughout human history, women have dealt with a lot of issues of not having any legal protections. For example, marriage causing women, for example, not to have the right to own property, not to have the right to divorce an abusive husband. There are so many things that we look and say, wow, was that really a thing? So we do tackle these topics a lot. And while I do appreciate the designation of Women's History Month, Black History Month, all of those designations are obviously important, but at the same time, I think it's important to cover these topics throughout the year in our curriculum.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, I was looking at an article the other day and it was saying how people should look at history from a female perspective, as it's often focused on, the males and,
Mhm.
how their experience. So would you agree with that, or do you see it in a different way?
Well, I think it is definitely important to have those perspectives represented. Absolutely, and it's just so fascinating because obviously, when you have when all parties are at the table and you have all these different perspectives, you are correct. A woman's perspective is a lot different. So when countries, for example, go to war, a woman's experience during wartime is going to be vastly different than a man's experience. And we're not saying more or less important, we're just saying different. And then, for example, that those discussions should be brought into the arena. So especially when we're looking at the makeup of governing bodies, state level, local level, national level, women are still very underrepresented. There have been gains, and Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, those have been very exciting gains for women on a national stage. But I think we can always do better. And I think definitely, now myself having a daughter after having two sons, I'm even more aware of the importance of kind of changing the conversation so that women do have more of a place at the table.
Right. I totally agree with that. And I feel like Kamala Harris has become like a figure that, I feel like people 50 years from now will, remember her young girls. But Who is your favorite historical female figure that you teach to your students, or that you just, you admire, and what do you admire of her?
Sure. It's so interesting. I really don't have a favorite. I know of recently I've kind of delved a little bit more deeply into the temperance movement, and I never really realized before how the temperance movement and really abolition as well. It wasn't that women began during the antebellum period. I spent a lot of time on that, fighting for women's rights. It was women getting involved in the abolition movement, getting involved in the temperance movement. And that kind of led them to start saying, well, we need to have political rights so that we can fight for legislation that will deal with the excessive drinking in the middle of the 19th century that was adversely affecting women because men were spending a lot of family money on alcohol binges, and they were abusive toward their wives. And as I said, they didn't have the legal right to divorce an abusive husband. So, and same with the abolition movement. You had women, Lucretia Mott, for example, showing up at an abolition convention in England, and she was denied entry. And that's when she and Stanton kind of turned around and said, "Okay, never mind. We're yes, I mean not never mind, but we have another cause that we need to fight for now." So I've really kind of seen more of not everything being isolated, but I've been trying to focus a little bit more on the cause and effect and how everything kind of came together. And also reform movements were some of the only ways that women could be involved in anything, particularly upper middle class women. They weren't allowed to work outside the home, but what you could do was get involved in a reform movement. So I'm sorry I'm not giving you particular names. Emma, oh, I've got to turn off dinner. I'm sorry, hold on 1 second.
It's okay.
Okay, how's that? I'm sorry, I know that wasn't very I do like how Susan B. Anthony, oh, here you go, real quick. So what was interesting about the anniversary of women's right to vote officially last year was the fact that Susan B. Anthony had intentionally voted in the 1876 presidential election, and she was arrested for it, and arrested happily and gladly went to court and everything. And former President Trump actually pardoned her on the anniversary of the voting amendment. And some historians said, you know what, she might not even have wanted to be pardoned, because she kind of saw her arrest as kind of a badge of honor. So those kinds of stories are really, really cool. Women who kind of stood up to the patriarchy and dared them. Yeah, go ahead, throw me in jail, see how that goes. It's pretty interesting. So yeah, those are just a few examples.
Yeah, I'm taking a push 2 right now. We're learning about the 1960s,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like a lot of reform in terms of women, coming forward and saying they deserve equal pay and increased employment opportunities. And I believe that there was some change, but as we do know, women still do face much gender discrimination and the forms of unequal pay, and also like less opportunities in the workforce. So was women's history always celebrated? Were there contributions to society, even household tasks, were they celebrated?
You mean women's movements or just the traditional gender roles?
I think traditional gender roles.
Well, what's really interesting is that you had the traditional gender role that we always talk about, but that traditional gender role, since especially I think is pertinent since we have this heightened awareness of the different racial experiences throughout our country's history. You didn't have this. The traditional gender role was always expected of middle to upper middle class or elite white women, because they were the ones who were supposed to be staying home, caring for the family. But if you were a poor woman or a woman of color, you had to work. You didn't have the luxury of staying home. And not that that was always a luxury, but your story was a lot different. That said, and of course, obviously enslaved women too. They're not satisfying that traditional gender role in the 18th and 19th centuries. But when you're talking about that traditional role from the period after the Revolution through the 19th century, which is where I spent a lot of my time in my class, it actually was celebrated, because if women were supposed to be the moral leaders of the household, and they're the ones who are supposed to be raising the children and guiding everyone in the right direction and making sure to enforce religious values and things like that, women really did have, and the whole wife and mother thing on top of it, they really did have some moral authority. And that's why that enabled them to move into these reform movements in the middle of the 19th century, because you're going to listen to a woman talking about temperance. You're going to listen to a woman, wagging the finger about equal education and things like that. So that part of it was kind of celebrated. And even though they had to hard fight for so many rights, that moral authority did kind of give them some credence. That's the word I'm looking for. Credibility. There it is.
Yeah, I think that like flows really well into the other question I had, which was, we learn, like even in APUSH, we learn always about how women are in charge of, domestic chores. Mm-hmm. And I've always understood it, but I've never really understood the reason why they've been traditionally expected to handle these domestic chores. Yeah.
Oh, are you asking me why?
Oh yeah, sorry, that was the question.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Well, it's just kind of the way it always was. Childbearing and child rearing is always going to be an extremely labor-intensive job, and you will, if you choose to have children, you will find that out. You hear how hard it is, but you don't realize it, myself included, until you actually have a baby, and it's like, oh my gosh. So if the women's job, and as I'm sure you also know, and this becomes a big issue in the 60s, but it's not the first time it's an issue, that women didn't really have a lot of control over how many children they had. And part of the 60s, as I'm sure you're learning, is women wanting to have access to more birth control. So they were not just pregnant every 2 years the way you were back in the colonial times. And that was the expectation. So if you're already taking care of the children, then the idea is that you are, taking care of the rest of the home. But even then, that's not always going to be the situation, because back before the Industrial Revolution, a lot of production was done at home too. So women had to produce clothing and other materials for economic security for the family. But as the Industrial Revolution made those more available outside of the home, then women are still home. Like you're again, the expectation, middle, upper class women, they're supposed to be staying home. They don't have to be out working. So your job is to raise the family and to tend to the household, while now the husband.
For some reason, I cannot hear. Maybe it's my mistake. I don't know what happened.
It's me.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's me. For whatever reason, my Wi-Fi randomly rejects Zoom.
Okay.
I don't know. It happens at least once every Zoom meeting. It might happen again. But
No,
where did I leave off, or did you get enough?
I think I got enough. I think I was on my next question,
Okay.
Which was, again, the 1960s. The Equal Pay Act was signed in 1963, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I think that was when women earned around 59 cents, but that was to every dollar a man earned. And okay. I think today, it's about women earn 78 cents to every dollar a man earns. So why do you think it's taking, so long to close this pay gap, and how can we close it more quickly?
It's there has always been a backlash against any push for equal treatment for women and things like that. It dates. I was just going over some political cartoons from the 19th century with my students today. Hey, I'm on the interview. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Just went over today. It was this whole, and I'm sure Mrs. Dolan showed it to you guys last year too. The whole age of brass, where it's you have like all these women smoking cigars and wearing top hats, and the men are all standing around holding the children, and the women are yelling at the men. And there's a woman next to a sign that says, "Oh, the celebrated man tamer." And I said, "Oh, it's a good thing things haven't changed." It's like, you can't just say, "Hey, maybe we should give women political rights." It's, "Hey, if women have the right to vote, then the gender roles will be totally reversed and men will be totally emasculated. It'll be the end of the world." And, I think we still have a lot of that today, unfortunately. As soon as we talk about trying to make up for treating certain groups in the past, legally, certain groups in the past being left out of progress, there's always going to be backlash, unfortunately. And I think that's kind of where we are. I mean, when you look at the people who have been talking about equal pay and stuff like that, I mean, we've had a lot of years where political figures in power, that wasn't a priority. And then, of course, you always have a lot of backlash against that. So, I think that's where, unfortunately, we still don't have a lot of progress. And as you saw, and as I'm sure you all know, just the $15 minimum wage hike. You still have a lot of women who work those types of jobs, probably disproportionately to men, just due to maybe single moms trying to make ends meet and things like that. Those are the jobs that really need that pay boost. And as you saw, you've got the Democratic Party that's always running on those types of things, and then you had a couple Democrats that said, "Nah, still not there." And all it would have done is, when you adjust for inflation, raise the minimum wage to what it was back in the Great Depression. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I think you can apply that logic or illogic to a lot of the pushes for change and the pushes for progress. I'm sorry, I feel like I always go on forever. Don't get me started.
I feel like what you said, I agree with that, because we still see an overwhelming number of male politicians compared to, female politicians. And I do believe that plays, and again, coming to the illogic, what you said.
Well, and I think we've had some progress, but there can definitely be more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that women are underrepresented in any aspects of modern American life?
Well, I think there are still conversations going on that surprise me. Still conversations going on that are the same conversations that I teach about happening in the 1800s. So yeah, I still think that, and backlash against some of these ideas about making progress about some women's issues. I think the backlash is effectively propagandized in a way to kind of freak everybody out and talk about end of days. But then I think if people really got educated about some of the issues that we're talking about here, I think there would be, maybe a different discussion. But I think that we're definitely seeing, again, I think progress, but I think there can be more progress. And you're right, it's not fair to assume that every woman feels the same way about things. That's not accurate. But I still think a lot of the conversation is being controlled by men. And I think that women still have things to be nervous about and deal with disproportionately to men, sexual harassment being a big one there. So, we're still seeing a lot of these conversations, and I still don't think they're being taken as seriously. And I probably should stop there.
I mean, I completely agree, but I do agree, because, gender discrimination, I feel like, yes, we have come such a far way from where we, originally were, but I do see us, backtracking in several ways. And it's just like, I feel like women just aren't being heard, at times. So I do agree.
And again, then the answer will be, well, you're assuming that all women want this. This is what I get from some people close to me. And it's like, okay, fine, but we're still not listening to those other voices. So I think that can definitely be a problem. And I mean, and when we're talking about just different groups, I mean, look at women, but also, I mean, just look how great the 2020 election was, just in terms of the number of people who voted. And look at all the laws that are being proposed across the country seeking to severely limit voting abilities for not just people of different colors, but also those kinds of laws affect poor populations. And you do have a lot of women living in poverty. So abilities to change what people feel is hurting them is going to continue to be challenged. And that's disappointing as well. And I think that women will be more greatly affected if we're just breaking it into men and women's issues. And it's tough because it doesn't have to be like an us versus them type thing. But I just think that there is effective propaganda that demonizes a lot of women's issues. It's very effective. And I would love to see some of the conversations change a little bit.
Yeah, I saw some sort of like cartoon in an article, and it was like, we won't have, complete gender equality until 2120 or something crazy like that. And I was just, that like really just shocked me, because I was like, 2120, like really, like that long? So.
And what does that even mean? Like gender equality. I mean, it's I'm not even sure what that means. But again, if we can't even, I'm a little discouraged if we can't even raise the minimum wage to like a kind of living wage, but not even really that impressive. I get nervous about what's going to happen.
Yeah. So I'll just end on an optimistic note. What hopes?
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be pessimistic.
I think the questions I asked were a bit like, pessimistic too, but I just, what hopes do you have for the future of women empowerment and gender equality? And
yeah, what hopes I do have, I am hopeful. I am very hopeful. And I think that awareness, despite everything, I think awareness has definitely increased tremendously. And obviously, where I work, I see examples of very highly educated and highly motivated women who are going to get out there and get into, the workforce or just, choose their own paths. And I think more education and more awareness, as controversial as some of these discussions can be, I think awareness is very, very important. And it's stuff you don't even think about, because, again, I now have a little girl of my own after 2 boys. And, I ask her what she wants to be, what she wants to grow up. And the answer for over a year now has been a princess. And as much as I keep trying to explain to her that that's not a thing, and she gets devastated. And I think, what am I doing wrong? Did she watch a little bit too much old school Disney? So I think just making sure that there is awareness of all kinds of things, so that the younger generations are not also just being directed into one category, which I think that we might do without even realizing we're doing it either. You know what I mean? So I'm hopeful, because I think awareness, because me myself, even as a mother of a girl now, I'm aware of like, oh yeah, maybe gotta dress you up like Ruth Bader Ginsburg a little bit more, and then we'll see what you want to be when you grow up.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, because I know part of this package is also honoring females that go into the STEM field, and I think that's also, it's increasing, but I do feel like we're slowly getting there, because I feel like even just me, I don't feel limited to anything. I feel like there's a wide variety of, I still feel like, looking at females in engineering, it's still somewhat like, well, it's still, yeah.
So that's what you want to go into?
No, I personally am not like a science math person, but I do have friends, that, STEM, they've already decided they want to be an engineer or something. And I think it's really cool that they've already, it's already set, done, nothing's going to, get in their way. So I think that's really cool.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And there definitely needs to be more representation. And and I also believe that, there are differences between men and women. There are physical differences, there are biological differences. And, I think there is a reason that there is a certain dominance of men and women in certain fields, definitely. But I think, as you say, access to education, access to awareness is really what it needs to be all about.
Right. Thank you so much for having this interview with me. It was so interesting to hear.
Thank you.
Perspective, because I'm not very knowledgeable about the details of women in history, and I just wanted to know
I didn't do a good job then.
No, I learned so much from you. I really did. I feel like so much is overlooked, and I feel like I really got to understand how far we've come, although we still have quite a far way to go. We have come somewhat far. So
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And Tharunika, I'll tell you, it's something that Mrs. Dolan and I for APUSH, we're constantly saying like, oh man, we gotta give this more attention. We got to give that more attention. It's so hard to try to get everything in. And agree. There's always more work to be done, covering a variety of non-traditional historical topics, and that is something that I do like about the designated months, because it heightens awareness, and that can never be a bad thing.
right. I do have to say I've learned a lot about, awareness to how gender roles have developed in APUSH. I genuinely don't think I would have as much knowledge as I do if it weren't for taking APUSH. So
well,
thank you for
yeah, no, I'm glad to hear it. I'll pass that on to Dolan.
Thank you so much for having this interview with me.
You're welcome. And shoot me an email when it comes out. I would love to read the whole piece.
Okay, I'll be sure to do that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.